All right, welcome everybody. It's good to have you here. And what I want to do, I think in the course of this conversation is to understand what the problem is that they're trying to solve, how they're trying to solve it, and kind of why. Why are these folks engaged in this line of work? So I want to start it off, I think Victor, I want to start off with you. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, but I think, more importantly, really focus on the problem that you're trying to solve, and we'll kind of come around and go as to how you're trying to solve it.
Yeah, hi everybody. Excited to be at Decipher. So I was born and raised in a little country called Zimbabwe. I love calling it Wakanda because a lot of exciting things are going on over there. And it's, essentially like many other people in my generation, we decided to go out of the country for us, to further our education. And it's upon returning home that, I was actually bamboozled by this problem that regardless of this fact that I was born and raised in this society, I could not open a bank account because I did not have my name on a small piece of paper called a utility bill. And that was more than enough to ensure that I had this insane obstacle to access a very basic financial service. So essentially, FlexID organically materialized from that. And what it is, FlexID fundamentally exists to fulfill the promise of onboarding the next billion people, not just into Web3, but into the broader economy. And we do this by leveraging Algorand to offer a decentralized digital identity solution in order to offer access. Because without access, there is no market for the products we are building. Without access, there will be no users for the protocols and platforms that everybody in this room is eagerly building. And this is what FlexID essentially exists to do.
That's great. And actually, the thought of access brings me to you, Akshay. I mean, access, what does that mean for you folks at Visa? And given the outline that Victor's just given us of the magnitude of the numbers, and how do you talk about that?
Yeah, look, access is absolutely at the core of everything we do, right? We enable millions and millions of people to pay at tens of millions of merchants, so 80 million merchants around the world and counting. And if we look at it broadly, yes, we want to enable people to get financially included. In fact, the digital payment is, for many people, the very first time they have used any kind of formal financial system. So inclusion from that perspective, digital payments plays a critical role, especially in this part of the world. And even from a crypto perspective, right? Access and inclusion are critical. And we'll talk more about that, but the average crypto holder struggles to use their crypto holdings at a point of sale, like to buy a frappe or to get some bread. And so how do we enable that access? So we're working with more than 75 of the biggest exchanges in the world to actually issue Visa cards that people can use to buy groceries, to buy anything at 80 million Visa merchants globally. And that's been really popular because we saw in 2021, so this is already, when it was still taking up, we saw $3 billion were spent on those Visa cards because people wanted to be able to use their crypto anywhere to run their lives. And even beyond that, there's so many cases for access and inclusion just by connecting all these people to the different nodes in our network, and that's something really at the core of what we do.
Fantastic. And I guess, Eduardo, I'll come to you next because I know you've got a partnership with Visa, and it's interesting in terms of, again, this idea of access. But talk a little bit about AgroToken and the problem that you're trying to solve, and a little bit about the how. We can get back to that later, but it's a little bit different from everybody else up here. So I want you to talk about the problem itself.
Yeah, the problem is, I think we are, sorry for the voice, I've been yelling a lot for Argentina on the World Cup last game. We lost the first one, so so I ran out of voice a little bit. But basically, we are democratizing the grain, the commodities, and we are giving farmers the possibility to trade and to sell and to price their production, their grains, in a more fair price and fair part, and to use them in microtransactions, something that they are not able now. So That is what we are solving, and we are giving access to people. We think, we talk about this crypto winter, and we think people will be willing to have access to other crypto assets and assets that are guaranteed and collateralized by real assets. That will be something that, for example, in Latin America, where we are based and we started, 2% of the people, they don't have, 99% of the people, they don't have access to the capital market. They don't have access to saving, so they don't have their currency. They don't have currency. Their currency is devaluating. The inflation, we are talking about inflation of between 50 and 100% a year. So they lost all their savings. They don't have a way they can buy a property. They don't have access to financing. We believe that having savings on assets, on real assets that they understand, like wheat, corn, farming, farmland, energy, things that they understand and they can really touch and see where they are, that will be a big difference for them.
And the focus is the smallholder farmer focus, that access to capital, that increase ultimately in income is what a big part of what this is about. And I know we have some friends from the United Nations World Food Program and others here who are really focused on increasing the smallholder farmer kind of power of that purse, right?
This is to empower the small farmer, like to give them access to financing, using the grain, and to use the grain and spend the grain whenever they want or whenever the best price, and to give it access to that. So we believe that by tokenizing grain or tokenizing food, like on the long run, we will, a farmer could sell directly to the consumer. Mm-hmm. So we all know how much lettuce or tomato we spend in 1 week in our homes. Why we cannot buy straight from the farmer and we have delivered the amount of tomato or lettuce straight to our house in the quality that we like, and we can pay for that like a fair price, and the farmer and the producer can receive a fair price for that. We deposit the money, we leave it in a smart contract, in an escrow account. Once the product is delivered, the money is delivered to the farmer. The farmer will know how much exactly he's going to receive for all his production, and how much he has to produce, and in what quality. So that is right. That is what we are empowering for those small farmers, that they can have more traceability too, that they can see in advance how much they have to produce and how much they are going to get for the crops. Something that now they have no idea, or they have so many intermediaries in the middle that they don't receive the fair price.
Right, and that's the power of new technologies. And James, I mean, you talk about earning, right, and talk about empowering people to actually make some kind of profit. You're all about kind of learn, play, and earn, and talk a little bit about that. And I think it kind of segues nicely into what you're doing in terms of that power of that making some money gives you.
For sure. First of all, appreciate you, man, the Algorand team, for setting all this up. Quick intro. Hi, I'm James, co-founder of Jambo. Grew up as Victor's neighbor, not too far, in DRC in Central Africa. I was there for about 16 years. My family's been there 3 generations. So honestly, what got me into crypto and everything that Jambo is centered around is around the problems that we think are the most interesting to solve using crypto in the market that's most interesting to solve in the region of Africa. So as of today, Jambo essentially is an education company where our first product out is called Jambo Academy. It's a 10-week learn-to-earn program, like rabbit hole, alchemy. Every week you can learn something new and earn tokens. So essentially Africa is like 1% super rich, 99% the same. So if you're expecting someone to be able to transfer tokens, preload your digital wallet with tokens, that's not the 99% of Africa we're talking about here. So end of the day, what our mission is for someone that like a 19-year-old in Lagos to be able, because there's 50% smartphone penetration in Africa, don't get me wrong. It might not be the phone that you have, but it's a low data, low bandwidth, low storage, 100 to 200 US dollar phone that's able to access Web3 rails. And with 60 to 80% unbanked, they're able to be banked. So they first have to have the knowledge of what crypto can do and help them. So that is why our first product out is called Jambo Academy, roughly 100,000 users today. The mobile version of it actually just launched yesterday on Android, so we're very excited. As you know, Africa is predominantly mobile-centric, so that's a little bit about what we're doing today.
That's fantastic. And Abhinav, I mean, I think you started Eco India
2007.
2007, yeah, it's been a long journey. So talk to us about the original, you know, what was the problem that you were trying to solve and how you've been doing it actually over time. I mean, I think it's a really interesting narrative.
First of all, thank you, Matt. Thanks for humbled by the Algorand folks to give me an opportunity to share my story. I relate to all the stories of all the entrepreneurs, everyone sitting on the stage here. But let me just share, I started my company in September of 2007. It's been 15 hard years of trying to create impact in India. But just before I started my company, I had this 2 years of experience where I worked really close with mobile network operators in India and Middle East and Southeast Asia, and kind of witnessed how prepaid telephony actually grew like wildfire in these regions as well as in India. And India, where there was so much of exclusion of telephony, we saw a billion phones get distributed within less than 5 years. And as a young guy and you know, somebody who kind of understood technology, I thought something's got to be done in the space of financial services as well. And there was a lot of information out there, you know, which was kind of conveying back to us that only about 20% of bankable Indians had bank accounts. And certainly the problem that Victor is solving today, nobody unfortunately solved for us. And we had to go ahead and solve for ourselves in terms of ID. And so we recognized that bank accounts were not getting opened by people who could have had a bank account. And once you don't have a bank account, you can't cash in, cash out, payments, etc. is out of the question at all. So the last 15 years, these are the things that we've really solved for. You know, India in 2007 probably was just about 20% of people who were banked. I'm happy to share that now India claims more than 1 billion bank accounts that have been opened in the last 15 years. And trust me, it's not the bank branches which have opened it. It's not, and they're not being opened on smartphones either. These are micro entrepreneurs spread across the length and breadth of the country who are assisting, who are on one side getting trained by the banks, and on the other side interfacing with customers and opening bank accounts for them and assisting them in basic banking services. And amongst a lot of operators who operate in this space, Echo is one of them. And I'm just happy to be participating in this sector in India, and very proud to be a contributor. Certainly because you know, we started 15 years back, and we were amongst the very first ones who kind of started to do it. We certainly know the history, present, past, and the future of this in India.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, you touched on that notion of identification. Victor, I mean, I've heard you speak very eloquently about, you know, identification as a human right, in a sense. I mean, how important is that? I mean, it's a kind of a theme throughout the panel, in a sense, more so for us some than others, but why is that so important, and how do you specifically solve for that problem, particularly in remote areas where, you know, access is very limited?
Great. You know, fundamentally, identity is necessary for social mobility. So let's say I am a farmer that is actually going to be utilizing AgroToken. And say AgroToken is working with FlexID. Now, when my mom grew up in her village, they had this bucket system where they would actually harvest the maize or the corn that they would have farmed, put it in a bucket, and they would take it to the school in order to pay tuition. For most subsistence farmers in the world, this is their form of income. But if you operate within the informal sector, the formal economy does not even recognize that as a form of income. FlexID now provides this individual, even if they do not have a smartphone, with a wallet that allows them to now store these verifiable credentials. from AgroToken who will know that this individual is actually economically active at their particular level. Likewise with Jambo, if this individual is actually earning via their platform, they are now able to issue that individual that credential directly associated to their wallet. And what this means is innovators now, like Echo or any other builder, can build applications that directly target this individual to verify those credentials and provide service. So what we've essentially done is we've now built the bridge that allows individuals to communicate directly with institutions, startups, companies, and anyone else really if they want to provide those individuals with service. Because without that, you essentially discover it is a challenge even for companies to scale. Because how are you going to take your company into Nigeria? How are you going to take your company into Sudan? How are you going to take your company into Zimbabwe, into India, if you do not have the infrastructure which is going to allow you to onboard the individuals that are the most economically active, whether they're subsistence farmers, whether they're commuter omnibus taxi drivers, whether it's a lady who is a vendor. She is earning via mobile money. She's receiving her payments on her mobile phone. She does not have a bank account or a credit score. We are now able to give her a platform that is going to allow her to now have that dignity, to have that financial independence, and to allow institutions to now build services that target markets that traditionally they were never going to target. So Flex ID fundamentally came into existence to solve that problem. And we're excited because as of now, in Zimbabwe, we've managed to acquire over 300,000 active users, and majority of them emerged from the financial service need to open bank accounts, to apply for credit with microfinance institution, and even in healthcare. We now have individuals that used to have their medical prescriptions and records stored in physical counter books, now storing them in that digital and verifiable credential format. And what this means is they can travel the breadth and width of the whole country, and any medical practitioner who uses Flex ID is able to verify them and provide them that healthcare service. And that was never possible before.
Oh, that's extraordinary. That must speak to you, Akshay. Yeah,
It's amazing.
every time I hear Victor speak, I clap. Even in my head and walking down the street, I'm thinking about Victor. but that must speak to you. I mean, in terms of the numbers and the prohibitions, in a sense, the roadblocks that people encounter in terms of entering that system. How do you respond to something that Victor said in terms of that the basis for access is identification and the growth that involves?
Yeah, so look, here's how I would respond. Firstly, by clapping. Secondly, by supporting him, right, in every way we can. And here's another thing. Access and inclusion is not one thing that you can solve with one solution. This is a broad spectrum of problems from, basic financial inclusion to getting, even very developed segments and markets access to things they currently can't access. So we, as a network, as a platform, our role is to enable all these kind of use cases. And that's what we do best. So I'll give you a real case study, right? Like with Eduardo, with the AgroToken. So these guys have built, which I consider an absolutely fantastic model, where you take grain reserves, you tokenize them, and the farmer wins because now he's able to sell those tokens not just to institutions but to customers. He's able to generate liquidity in a way that was never possible before. And where we come in, after the great work that these guys have done, is okay, now the farmer needs to also go and buy food for their family or to pay for an Uber or whatever they want to do, right? And so what AgroToken does with Visa is they issue a Visa card that the farmer gets. As simple as that. And right with that card, they can use it at merchants. Through other services of ours, which, for those of you who are payment geeks, we call push payments, we enable people to liquidate their AgroTokens and push money directly into fiat, into their bank accounts to finance their kids' education or whatever it is. So the innovation that's happening in the space of inclusion and access, like you've heard from these fine folks here, it's tremendous. It's varied, it's diverse. And I would say, like, not just for Visa, but all of you sitting here, how can your proposition, how can the value you bring enable some of these kind of folks to do what they do better?
Yeah, that's a great answer. And James, I'm curious to hear, like, what do you see in the future? I mean, you talked about smartphone penetration. I think you said it's something like 50%, even though Many of those are relatively low end, but it seems to be growing in ubiquity with some fairly rapidly. What does that mean for you, and how do you see Jambo kind of growing and bringing that to more and more people? And how fast do you think that will happen?
A great question. I think let's throw some statistics out there, right? 12x crypto adoption last year in Africa. 3 of the largest peer-to-peer markets for Bitcoin transactions is in Africa. Number 2 is Nigeria, 8 and 10 is South Africa and Kenya. Like, these are stats that, you know, Jambo is not contributing to. I'm saying these are just hard facts. That's what's happening in Africa as a continent right now. I think smartphone penetration is super important because only through that can they actually access a lot of the Web3 rails. Now, if you look at some of the most interesting problems, right, what I said, how I even got into crypto is sending money back home to Congo. Well, usually you would use Western Union, T+5, T+8, 10%, 8%. Well, using Bitcoin, it's a lot faster. Well, today, let's see, banking the unbanked might be one of the biggest themes around Africa. So in our main application that comes out next year, our non-custodial wallet is one of the most important functions. But let's say tomorrow you could airdrop a non-custodial wallet to everyone in Africa. Congrats, you just banked the entire continent. The problem is people still would have no access to the broader financial infrastructure because they don't have access to credit. So Flex ID, very important, yes sir. So yeah, credit is something we've been thinking about since day one, since Jambo launched exactly a year ago. How you can build up a credit system for people that is predominantly 60 to 80% unbanked. Is that through, because everything in Africa right now is done through your phone number, right? It's monopolized by a few telcos. 4G penetration is great in Africa, it's just very expensive. So you have to work with a lot of Web 2 and Web 1 folks and individuals locally in order to actually get to that Web 3 stage to help them bypass legacy gatekeepers. So I think credit and a non-custodial wallet is 2 of the most important things for Jambo moving forward next year. And the last component is around the exchange, right? Anytime you're talking about Africa, 54 countries, every region is so different. Like, I grew up in Congo. That was a Belgian colony, so I grew up speaking French. You move to East Africa, Kenya, that's Swahili English. You go to Senegal, that's Wolof and French again. Every region is so different. And how are you going to penetrate that fiat to crypto on rail? So from Congolese francs, you know, to Naira, et cetera. Because today, M-Pesa is probably one of the best networks for mobile money in Africa. But you cannot send money from Kenya using M-Pesa to your boy in Ghana at all. So crypto obviously can solve for that. But before that, it's who can build the infrastructure and help users be able to have a mobile wallet, be able to have a credit system to access the broader financial infrastructure, and then creating these trading pairs and local currency to crypto.
I mean, imagine that cross-border ability to send money. Like, you know, that would be a game changer. But Abhinav, you know, James talked about, you know, the future and what that holds, and you talked about 1 billion new accounts since 2007. I'm just thinking why this is so important. What have you seen since then in terms of, you talked about the increase in the number who have access. What does that mean for a country like India? What has that meant in terms of economic growth and personal growth for people who had been locked out prior to that? Because you have a relatively long stay in this.
Certainly. Happy to answer that question. The kind of visibility that we have, just to share a few numbers, at least from an Echo's perspective, we have about 300,000 micro entrepreneurs embedded on our platform. We help about 200 digital brands reach to 50 million customers over the last 15 years. And these brands would span across, certainly banking. Most of our work has been across with banks, but we've also started to work with insurance companies, utility companies. We've now also started to work with edtech, gaming, entertainment, and stuff like that. And one of the biggest learning, you know, if you kind of take a step back, one of the biggest learning that we had is that, you know, India is brimming with, you know, we are dripping with innovation every day, and there's almost a digital brand taking birth every day, right? And what's happening is that digital brands across these categories think of digital journeys for customers to consume their product and services. Now, what we've understood is once great user experience are created on the mobile phone, while it certainly creates inclusion for a certain segment of the societies, what's happening in India, it parallelly creates an exclusion as well. You know, certainly everybody probably has a smartphone, but somebody is unable to understand the language of the application, somebody is hesitant to use it, etc., etc. Many smaller, bigger reasons lead to exclusion. As a result of which, what we are saying is there is a need for physical assistance. Now, today that assistance may be needed for banking. Tomorrow it may be needed for insurance. 5 years down it may be needed for wealth management, maybe edtech, etc., etc. But there is a space for assistance along with self-service. And what really made 1 billion accounts possible was assistance, right? People weren't walking into, people don't have formal jobs, as a result of which the organizations don't really help them open bank accounts. People weren't, walking into bank branches, etc., right? So there was need for assistance to be provided. Over the last 15 years, we've kind of noticed that assistance is not only required in banking and therefore financial inclusion. Tomorrow we'll be talking about insurance inclusion. 5 years down, we may be talking about entertainment inclusion, right? And that's what needs to be solved for. And as far as India is concerned, 1 billion bank accounts. One of the most important things that infrastructure like ours also solved for is that during COVID, I don't know how many of you kind of noticed that there were millions of people who were walking back home from industrial cities and towns in India to back to their villages, because the government announced a lockdown and there were a lot of people out of jobs. And the government then kind of came in and decided to do benefit transfers, right? Now you start transferring money from the federal government onto the bank account of the people who live in villages. Guess what? There's no ATMs. How do you, and they're not, using digital modes of payments. But there were these small micro entrepreneurs with biometric devices in their hand who were providing cash out services to millions of people. And just to give you a scale, I think the federal government disburses close to about 7 to 8 billion US dollars monthly, which gets cashed out through infrastructure like ours and not the traditional banking infrastructures of ATM and bank branches. And that's how huge this infrastructure of, let's say, branchless banking, if you want to say, agent banking, you want to say, has come about. So there's massive economic development because of this infrastructure. There's massive inclusion because of this infrastructure. And just to kind of, talk about, we've spent 15 years building this access, building the technology. And, when I hear James talk about inclusion with crypto wallets, it's like, wow. I wish that some of those things were available in 2007, but in 2007, we just had to do the hard work, right? And so here is a company, 15 years old, which has built everything in Web 2. And now we are really kind of deep diving into what the technology can kind of offer us. And because eventually we are all about inclusion, right? We're democratizing so many services to citizens in the country. What we've understood is finally there is a technology which helps us do that too. Right? It is fundamentally, Algorand or blockchain is built for democratizing access. And there are like tons of use cases. We can now think about, where we break our existing tech stack, put them on the blockchain. And there's so many more beautiful things and better access can get created.
Well, that democratization of access is a theme that is running through this panel. It's a theme that runs through what we do at Impact and Inclusion. I want to open it up for questions, but Eduardo, what does this mean to the smallholder farmer? And give us an example of what it means in somebody's life, a concrete, this is why this is important. Because I think as we talk about blockchain and we talk about things like this in this space, it's important to remember and to focus on real life use cases and what they mean to people around the world. So if you feel like it, please do.
Yeah, I think just to explain you, I'm going to use the examples of all that we are here. What is Victor said about his little community or town where people grow corn and put it in a basket is a collaborative, no? And these are small farmers. They work together, small piece of land, and they want to get the best for what they produce. At the end, what they produce what is food. Is what we eat at the end of the day. Is what we have on our dishes. And maybe they get the right price for that and the right value. I think during COVID, people start understanding the the new luxuries in the world, no? That is, food, energy, now with the war and all that. But basically, all of us, we are doing a collaborative world. And I think blockchain and the new technology is super collaborative because at the end, we are working all together for the same. He's giving identity to these people that we can certify that production, that corn that they produce, okay? That's what we created. We created the proof of grain reserve, that is the proof of existence, a proof of liquidity. And that is the documentation he will create. Jambo is going to create us the way, the access for that tokens that we created to use as collateral, for a financing for these farmers that they didn't have. We are going to use this access to the new fintech, that Web 2, because at the end, the Web 3 is a little bit complicated maybe for farmers that they don't have this education. And how they are going to use it with Visa. Mm-hmm. Visa will give them access to all these places, to all these merchants where they can use this corn that they produce. At the end, what we are doing with AgroToken is going back to barter. Mm-hmm. Instead of coming with a bag of corn and paying, for a coffee and taking the grains out of the bag and put it what is left on the bag, he's coming with a Visa and paying straight with his tokens, his corn that is flying, from his account, from his wallet of corn to the wallet of the Starbucks, mm-hmm. let's say. But this is what we are doing. That sounds complicated, but it's simple. It's coming back to the roots. It's where everything was created before, and this is at the end what will empower these small farmers to can be, rewarded in the right way and the fair way for what they do and they produce. That is, at the end of the day, is food for us. No?
That's great. Well, thank you. And this is all happening now. It's all happening now, which is fantastic. Listen, I wanted to throw it out. Since anybody has questions, we have several minutes left. Anybody who's interested in asking a question, just raise your hand. There's somebody with a mic will come over and feel free to speak up. And you can introduce yourself as well if you want, and tell us your name and where you're from.
Yeah, hi, thanks very much. Wonderful panel. My name's Jane Thomason. You've talked about what's needed to take it to scale, and people have talked about infrastructure, but I'd love it if anyone from the panel can talk about regulation and jurisdictional challenges in scaling these solutions.
Actually, you want to take
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's such a complex area to look at, right? Like the regulation challenges. So I think looking at Victor's world, KYC, know your customer, that's literally the doorway to get into any kind of financial product. So many different regulations around that. You have places where they say you don't need to ever come to a branch, you never need to actually meet someone, just scan your face and we'll verify your identity. You have places like India where, biometrics and identity are tied together in a government database, so it makes it really easy. And then you have some markets, like I used to work in Asia Pacific before this, and there was this one Southeast Asian country which just would not let go of the wet signature in anything financial. And so ultimately, I think we managed to change their mind because we went with a fintech partner. We actually built a proof of concept about how a rural citizen can simply sign up for financial services. And all they had to do was a few things, verify a couple of documents on their phone, take a couple of pictures, put in a couple of IDs, and that's it. And we told the government that, look, from start to finish, from literally being unbanked to having a Visa card, this took 5 minutes. And all you need to do is remove the wet signature from this equation. It was the central bank, actually. And it did actually change their mind. So I feel like we have to kind of show them the light. And I really believe in the power of prototyping and co-creation. We've done several with AgroToken. And building these things in a very tangible and visual fashion, taking them to the regulators, I hope that's how we can change some of these minds, make it a more homogeneous world.
Thank you, Akshay. Any other questions? Anybody's got a question? Raise their hand. That was one in the back.
Hi. I have a question for Victor, and I think for James. You mentioned that Africa is a very complex continent to work on a pan-African level because of all the jurisdiction differences, the historical differences, linguistic differences. And when we hear about innovation and digitalization, we often hear about Kenya, South Africa, often English-speaking countries in which digitalization, mobile money, where M-Pesa is already, often established a baseline. I'm curious to know how might we reach those people in some of the countries in Africa that perhaps are the most excluded, that perhaps speak Tigrinya or perhaps speak Portuguese, or are not naturally included in that kind of, if I may, leading hub of countries in Africa. Thank you.
Awesome. So one of the key things, that's right about that. Africa has 54 countries, and they're all diverse. Southern Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, West Africa, North Africa, which is Arabic speaking. And a key challenge for most companies and most businesses is actually coming up with that decision as to where they're going to launch their products and in which jurisdictions they're going to work. So unfortunately, over the past 10 years, the narrative has focused on about just a handful of about 5 countries, right? So Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, in some cases Egypt, and these have really, for the most part, even when it comes to venture capital, they've really monopolized a huge chunk of the pie, leaving out massive markets like Congo, massive markets like Ethiopia, places like Angola, Mozambique, which are Portuguese speaking. And the way we're actually solving that problem is, number one, we actually leverage existing infrastructure that other people would have already done the hard work for. So to give you a very good example, if you look at the telco companies such as MTN that have a pan-African presence, if you look at some of the financial institutions across Africa, that some are headquartered in South Africa, so whether it's your ABSAs, it's your net banks, they have this multi-jurisdiction presence. And if you look at your internet service providers, such as your liquids, they basically have what's called Cape to Cairo, which basically means that from South Africa all the way to Cairo in Egypt, they're present. So as Web3 companies, one of the key things we ought to be doing is piggybacking off this existing infrastructure and actually partnering with a lot of these institutions. One of our main focuses at FlexID has to be the institutional relationships that we've been building. And what it allows us to do is we actually have a strategic way in which our company is going to scale that is advised by the institutions that we decide to partner. It is not a race that you ought to be going alone. In Africa, there's a very important saying, which is, if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. So it's a key philosophy that we take at heart at FlexID, which has allowed us to partner with multiple organizations in different jurisdictions. So yes, if I want to be in Kenya today, it is very important to have Safaricom and M-Pesa. If I want to go to the Congo, I'm going to have Jambo be my main partner, etc., with other countries on the continent. So,
Appreciate you.
Yeah.
First of all, great question. Appreciate the question. Maybe I'll answer this from the perspective of Jambo, and I can't speak for how anyone else is entering Africa and tapping into all these markets. I think end of the day, it really depends on the founder of the company as well. So I speak French and English, right? I don't speak Portuguese, so it's going to be hard for me to tap into Mozambique and Angola, not going to lie. So all of Jambo's content is in English and French. So I think that's a good starting point to make your content and your local ambassadors in both languages and in the WhatsApp groups. So for us right now, where Jambo today is 105 people on the ground in Africa across 15 countries, and we're really trying to tap into Francophone Africa, but of the 100,000 users, I would say 80 to 90% is still in English-speaking Africa with a focus on Lagos, Accra, Nairobi, and some in South Africa. So it's definitely a challenge, tapping into a lot of different markets and different languages. I mean, if you look at a market, let's say, that is maybe 20 years ahead of Africa, that a lot of tech has happened, innovation of Southeast Asia. The unicorns there, Gojek, Tokopedia, Bukaloka, Grab, they start off in either Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia. They don't expand into each one of those simultaneously. And that is predominantly one language, but different cultures. Africa has different cultures and different languages. So I'd say it's definitely a big challenge, but for us, how we're trying to tackle that is mostly using language and localization with a heavy boots on the ground operation.
All right. Even though I'm the MC, we're out of time. I have to move you guys off. Unfortunately, we could talk about this for a long time. This is inspiring, and please find these folks around for the next day or a day and a half. Ask them questions, introduce yourselves, because as Victor says, it's to go the long distance, we have to go together, and I'm glad you kind of closed with that. So please give these guys a round of applause, and thank you very much, you guys. Awesome. All right. Thank you.